Welcome, and thank you for being here tonight. Let yourself settle. Wherever you are, however the day treated you, you are allowed to set it down now. All of it. The weight and the noise and the long list of things left undone. None of it needs you for the next little while. If this quiet hour helps you rest, you might gently leave a light or tell me in a comment where you are listening from tonight, and then let even that small thought sink away into the dark. From here, there is nothing to do but breathe and drift, and let a very old and very tender story carry you down, slowly, the way water carries something small toward the deep. We are going underground tonight, far underground, past the roots and the rock and the buried memory of a kingdom, down into a place that was already ancient when everything else was young. There is a fallen kingdom beneath us called Hallownest, and beneath even that, at the very bottom of everything, there is a darkness so old it has no proper beginning. That darkness has a name, though names sit strangely on it. It is called the Void, and this is, before anything else, a story about the children of that darkness, the small hollow ones made to hold back a plague, the ones the story simply calls the Vessels. It is a sad story, in the way the gentlest stories often are, and it is best told slowly, and it is a good story to fall asleep inside, because more than almost anything else, it is a story about rest, and about the ones who were never allowed any, and about what it might mean, at last, to be at peace. To understand the Vessels, we have to begin long before them, with two forces so old they are less like characters and more like the weather of the world. At the bottom of the abyss, in the lowest dark, there is the Void, and the Void is the oldest thing there is. It is not evil, though it is frightening. It is not empty, though it looks like emptiness. It is a vast, still substance, black and deep and quiet, a kind of living shadow that lies pooled beneath the world like an ocean that has forgotten the sky. Long, long ago, before the kingdom, before the bugs who would build it, there was a civilization that lived near that darkness and worshipped it, an ancient people who looked into the void and found something worth kneeling to. They are gone now. The story never explains where they went or why, and it does not try to. It simply leaves their broken relics scattered in the deep places, a few carved stones and rusted inventions, the only proof that anyone ever loved the darkness first. That silence around their fate is one of the story's oldest mysteries, and it is meant to stay a mystery. Some things are older than any explanation. Against that ancient dark there was light, and the light also had a name. She was called the Radiance, and she was a being of pure brilliance with power over dreams, a god of light who shone so fiercely that to look at her was to be filled. She belonged to the highest realm of the mind, the place bugs go when they sleep, and from there she could reach into any dreaming creature and be seen. Long ago she was worshipped too, by a tribe of moths who were her people, drawn to her light the way moths are always drawn, building their faith around her glow. For a time she was the brightest thing in that buried world, adored, remembered, held in the minds of all who slept. And that mattered more than it might seem, because the Radiance existed most fully in being remembered. She lived in the minds that held her. Her power was belief, and belief is a fragile thing, and belief can fade. Between those two forces, the deep old dark and the high old light, everything else in this story takes place. The void below, patient and silent and forgotten. The radiance above, blazing and worshipped and one day forgotten too. They are ancient enemies, light and shadow, the brightness that fills and the darkness that empties, and the whole long tragedy of Hallownest is really just the story of what happened when a third power rose up between them and tried, with terrible good intentions, to use one against the other. That third power was a king. And to tell you about the king, and what he made and why, we have to watch a great light slowly go out in the minds of those who once held it, and feel how much harm can come from something as quiet as being forgotten. The king was called the Pale King, and he was not a bug in the way the others were. He was a worm, one of the higher beings, an ancient and enormous creature who took a smaller shining form and came to that buried land carrying something the bugs there had never truly had. He gave them minds. Before him, the creatures of that place were dim and instinctive, wandering, half awake. The Pale King gave them thought and language and order and purpose, and around that gift he raised a kingdom. And the kingdom was Hallownest, and for a while it was radiant in a different way than the Radiance had ever been. A civilization of light and stone and learning, a city of tears and towers, a place that believed itself eternal. He was a god who built with his hands, careful and brilliant and proud, and he loved what he built, and the bugs loved him for building it. They turned their faces to him, their new maker, the one who had woken them into themselves, and in turning to him, they turned away from her. This is the quiet hinge on which everything breaks. As the bugs of Hallownest gave their minds and their worship to the Pale King, the old light of the Radiance dimmed in them, because she lived in being remembered and they were forgetting her. The moths who had been her people were absorbed into the new kingdom, and even they, over generations, let her slip from their minds, until the god who had once filled every dream was reduced to a faint, uneasy feeling, a name half recalled, a light behind a closing door. She did not die, because a god of that kind cannot simply die. She only faded, pushed to the edge of the sleeping mind, forgotten but not gone, dimming in a slow humiliation that lasted lifetimes. And a forgotten god, it turns out, is a very dangerous thing, because being forgotten does not end them, it only makes them desperate and patient and cruel. She came back through the one door that was still hers. She could no longer reach the waking world, but she could still reach the dreaming one, and so she began to appear in the dreams of the sleeping bugs of Hallownest, forcing them to remember her, forcing her light back into minds that had let her go. And the remembering was a sickness. To dream of the Radiance was to wake changed, feverish, filled with a light that did not belong there, and that light spread. It leaked from the eyes. It pooled orange and glowing beneath the skin. It hollowed out thought and left behind only a dim compulsion, a worship without a self, and the afflicted became husks, empty shambling things lit from within by a god's forced return. This is the plague the story calls the infection, and it is not a disease of the body, but of the mind, a spreading dream. the god clawing her way back into memory one sleeper at a time. It could not be cured by any medicine, because there was nothing physical to cure. It lived in the dreaming, in the mind, in the part of a creature that cannot be reached with any blade or any balm. The Pale King watched his kingdom begin to die of it, and he could not stop it. And for a being who had built a whole civilization with his own careful mind, that helplessness must have been a particular kind of agony. The infection needed a mind to enter. That was its nature and its only rule. It could only spread through creatures who could dream, who could remember, who could be reached. And in that single fact, the Pale King found the seed of the most terrible idea in the whole story. An idea so cold and so clever and so quietly monstrous that the kingdom is still, in a sense, echoing with it. If the infection could only take root in a mind, then the way to cage it forever was to seal it inside something that had no mind at all. A host with nothing inside it to be reached. A creature with no thought to invade, no will to bend, no self to corrupt. Pour the god of light into a perfect emptiness, and she would have nothing to hold on to, nothing to speak to, nowhere to spread. She would simply be contained, sealed in a darkness she could not fill, held shut forever inside a thing that could not be made to remember her. And so the Pale King went looking, in his desperation for a perfect emptiness, and he found it in the oldest place of all. He went down, past the roots of his own kingdom, into the deep dark that had been there before him, and he found the void pooled and waiting at the bottom of the abyss. Here was a substance with no mind and no will, a darkness that could take a shape and hold it, that could be made into a body without ever being made into a self. The old dark that the vanished ones had worshipped, the thing his kingdom had built itself on top of without ever looking down at, became, in his mind, the answer to everything. He would use the void to make a host for the light. He would fight the god of brightness with the substance of shadow. He would make, out of the oldest emptiness in the world, a creature so hollow that even a god could not fill it. He would make a vessel, and to make it he needed the darkness and something to shape the darkness with, and for that he turned to the one being in Hallownest as old and as strange as himself, his queen, the pale root that grew beneath the gardens. The being the story calls the White Lady. The White Lady was a higher being of a different kind, a root, a vast pale living thing that grew and dreamed beneath the Queen's gardens, ancient and gentle and wise. She was the Pale King's wife and the Queen of Hallownest, and she was, in her own quiet way, as powerful as he was, the goddess of growing things, where he was a god of order. Together they were the two great powers at the heart of the kingdom. Light and root, worm and tree, and together, in the deep dark of the abyss, they set about making children. That is the tender and horrible truth at the centre of the vessels, and the story does not soften it. The vessels were not built like machines. They were born. They were the progeny of the Pale King and the spawn of the White Lady, made of the king's essence and the queen's root, and the ancient void all at once, born of God and of darkness together, real children carrying the substance of two ancient beings and the oldest emptiness in the world. They were meant to be empty. They were meant to be hollow, and they were, at the same time, in the deepest sense, a family. Pause for a moment on what that means, because the story does not pause there, but perhaps it should. When we say the vessels were children, born of two beings, we are saying something that should make the whole plan feel heavier than it is usually allowed to. A child born of two parents, even a child born of darkness and root, carries within it a trace of something it cannot be argued out of. It carries the fact of being made by someone. It carries whatever fragment of the parents survived the making. And the plan required that this fact count for nothing, that the made thing feel no pull toward the makers, that the inherited darkness be perfectly inert, a container only, not a continuation. The plan required that the children not be children in any way that mattered. And it was, from the very beginning, a plan that could only fail, because you cannot make children and also make them into nothing, because the act of making already gives the made thing something, some small remainder of the ones who shaped it, some echo that persists even when the shell is sealed. This is the wound at the heart of the whole design, not the infection, not the radiance, but the simpler and more human thing that a parent cannot give birth to a child and have that child be truly empty. The Pale King was brilliant, and he was a god, and he built a kingdom out of cleverness, and he could not make this one true thing stop being true. Every vessel was already not nothing, not from the moment it was made, simply by virtue of having been made at all. The number of them is one of the quiet horrors the story lets you feel rather than states outright. There were not a few vessels, there were countless. Thousands, perhaps, born into the dark of the abyss, one after another, an endless brood created for a single purpose, and that purpose required that almost all of them fail. Because the Pale King did not need many vessels. He needed one. He needed one that was perfectly, completely hollow, one with truly nothing inside it, and there was no way to know which one that might be, except to make them, and test them, and discard the rest. So the abyss became a birthplace and a grave at once, a pit where new life was poured out endlessly, and then, almost as endlessly, judged and cast aside. It is the saddest place in the whole story, and we are going to spend some time down there tonight, gently, because the vessels came from that dark, and to understand them is to understand the place they were born and abandoned. Picture it, if you can do so softly, the way you might picture a sad place from very far away. The abyss is a vast vertical dark at the bottom of the kingdom, a chasm beneath the ancient basin, sealed away from the world above. Its floor is not stone but shadow, a sea of living void that pulls and shifts and reaches. Tendrils of that darkness rise from the deep water and lash at anything that comes near, not out of malice exactly, but out of some old instinct of the substance itself, a shadow that does not like to be disturbed. On the far shore stands a lighthouse, a tall, lonely structure whose light, when kindled, calms the reaching dark and lets a traveller pass. To the west there is an altar ringed by carved, screaming faces, mouths open in a silent cry, from which a certain terrible power can be drawn, and everywhere, scattered across the floor and the ledges and the deep, there are the shells. Small empty masks, little hollow bodies, the discarded vessels, the ones judged imperfect, lying where they fell when the kingdom decided they were not what it needed. Thousands of small dead siblings in the dark, and among them, still moving, the ones who never quite finished dying, because the vessels did not simply vanish when they were cast aside. Their shells broke, but something remained. Inside each vessel was a piece of the void given a shape, a small shadow self, and when the shell shattered, that shadow was let loose, and it lingered. The abyss is full of these, drifting things the story calls the siblings, the shades of the dead vessels, floating through the dark of their birthplace, with no thought and no rest, reaching toward any warmth that passes. They are frightening when you first meet them in the deep, these silent shadows that drift toward you and do you harm. But they are not monsters. They are your kin. They are the parts of your family that were made and discarded and left to wander a lightless pit forever. And the story is very careful to make sure you understand this before it is done, because everything turns in the end on the difference between fearing the dark and recognizing it as your own. Now, how does a kingdom decide which of thousands of hollow children is the one truly hollow enough to hold a god? The story does not spell out every detail of the testing and where it stays quiet. We should stay quiet too, and hold the gaps as gaps rather than filling them with invention. But it shows us enough to break the heart. It shows us that the way out of the abyss was a climb, a long dark ascent up the walls of the chasm toward the small distant light of the world above, and that to leave the birthplace a vessel had to make that climb itself. And here is the cruel logic the story quietly reveals, the reason so many failed the only test that mattered. A truly hollow thing has no will of its own, no bond, no care for anything. But the vessels climbing together in the dark, again and again reached back for one another. They helped their struggling siblings. They would not leave each other behind. And that, precisely that, the smallest flicker of care, was the thing that marked them as failures. Because a vessel that could love another vessel was a vessel with something inside it, and something inside it was exactly what could not be allowed. The ones who reached back were the ones who were not empty. And so the kindest of them, over and over, disqualified themselves by their kindness, and were cast back down into the dark. It is worth saying gently that some of this the story shows plainly, and some of it only implies, and the reaching back is closer to something we are invited to understand than something spelled out in words. What the story shows us directly is a single quiet, devastating moment near the top of the climb. Two vessels ascend together out of the dark, side by side, and the Pale King waits above, watching, hoping, holding his breath for the one that might finally be perfect. One of the two reaches the top with ease. The other struggles at the very last ledge, barely clinging, hauling itself up by the smallest margin. And the one who climbed easily, standing now beside the waiting king, does not reach down to help the one still struggling below. It turns, and it follows the king out of the abyss, and it leaves its sibling behind. That not reaching, that perfect absence of care, is what the Pale King had been searching for through thousands of discarded children. Here at last was one that seemed truly hollow, one that would not reach back, one with nothing inside it to make it stay. He took that vessel out of the dark, and he named it, and the name it was given was the Hollow Knight. And the one left struggling below, the sibling that was not chosen, the small vessel that hauled itself up the last ledge with no one reaching down for it, we will come back to. Hold that small climbing shape in the back of your mind as the night goes on. It matters more than anyone in the story could have guessed. The Hollow Knight was taken up into the world above and raised in the White Palace, the gleaming home of the Pale King, and there it was trained toward the single purpose it had been made for. It grew. It learned to wield a great nail, and to gather soul, and to draw on the void within itself, and it became strong. Extraordinarily strong, a warrior shaped for one impossible task. The Pale King poured years into it, preparing it, hardening it, readying it to hold a god. And here the story does something quietly merciless. It lets us see in one hidden memory the Pale King cradling the young vessel in a still and tender moment, a father holding a child, and that image undoes the whole cold plan from the inside, because a vessel was supposed to be empty, and you do not cradle an emptiness. Somewhere in all that raising, all that careful preparation, a bond formed between the king and the creature he had made, a real closeness, a warmth passing in both directions, and a vessel that is loved, and that perhaps loves in return, is not hollow anymore. The very tenderness that makes the memory beautiful is the flaw that dooms everything. The Pale King, searching so hard for a thing with nothing inside it, could not stop himself from putting something inside it after all. He put in love. And love in this story is the crack through which the light gets in. But that flaw would not show itself for a long time. And in the meantime the plan went forward, and for a while it even worked. When the Hollow Knight was grown and strong, it faced the Radiance, and it took the God of Light into itself and sealed her there, contained her, held her shut inside its hollow body. The story does not show us that first great sealing, only its aftermath, and the aftermath suggests it was a battle beyond imagining. The Hollow Knight came away from it having lost an arm, a wound it would carry ever after, and having taken into itself the full blazing weight of a forgotten god's fury. Then, to make the seal certain, the Pale King bound the vessel in chains in the deepest chamber of a temple, the Temple of the Black Egg, at the very heart of the kingdom, and there the Hollow Knight would stand, holding the light inside itself for as long as the seal could hold. A seal that great needed more than chains, though. It needed to be locked from the outside as well as the inside, and so the Pale King called on 3 of the kingdom's greatest to give up their waking lives and become the lock. They are called the Dreamers, and there were 3 of them, and each agreed to fall into an eternal sleep, dreaming forever. Their dreaming minds forming a seal over the black egg that could not be broken from without. There was Lurian, the Watcher, who gazed over the whole kingdom from his high tower, devoted and solitary. There was Monoman, the Teacher, a keeper of knowledge who had spent her life in study. And there was Hera, the Beast, a queen of the dark, tangled realm of Deepness, fierce and proud. The 3 of them lay down and closed their eyes and gave their dreaming to the ceiling, 3 sleepers holding shut the door behind which a god and a hollow child stood locked together in the dark. Hera's part in this carries its own small ache, because she did not give her sleep for nothing. She agreed to become a dreamer only on one condition, that the Pale King give her a child of her own first, and he did. That child is Hornet, born of the Beast Queen of Deepness, and the Pale God of the Kingdom, half of the dark and half of the light, sister to every vessel through her father, and yet not a vessel herself, not hollow, fully alive and fully herself. Her mother went to sleep forever to seal away her hollow siblings, and Hornet grew up in a dying kingdom as its lonely, fierce protector, bound by blood to the very seal she would come to guard. Remember her too. She waits at more than one threshold in this story, needle in hand, and she is one of the few in it who chooses, again and again, out of love rather than design. For a long age the seal held, and the kingdom believed itself saved. The infection was locked away inside the hollow night, and the hollow night was locked away inside the black egg. And the three dreamers slept, and the light of the Radiance was reduced to a rumour behind a sealed door. But the flaw was already there, small and patient, the way flaws always are. The hollow night was not truly hollow. Somewhere inside it, born of that bond with the Pale King, there was a thought, a feeling, the faintest flicker of a self, and the Radiance, trapped in the dark with nothing else to do for all those years, found it. She found the crack. She found the one small idea that had taken root in a creature that was supposed to have none, and she pressed on it, slowly, patiently, the way water works at stone, and over the long years she began once again to leak out. The White Lady named the failure with a terrible gentleness, in words that hold all the sorrow of the plan in a single breath. The vessel's supposed strength, she said, had been ill-judged. It had been tarnished by an idea instilled. That was all. Not a great flaw, not a betrayal, not a weakness of the body. Just an idea. Just a small instilled thing. Just the love that a father could not help giving and a child could not help receiving. And it was enough. The perfect emptiness was not empty, and the God of Light had found the one thing inside it to hold. Slowly the infection began to seep from the cracks in the hollow night's shell. Slowly the orange light returned to the kingdom. Slowly the husks began again, and the dreaming sickness spread, and everything the Pale King had sacrificed his own children to prevent began, quietly, to happen anyway. And the kingdom fell, not in a single night, but in a long dimming, a slow surrender to the returning light. The bugs of Hallownest succumbed one after another, minds going out like the lamps of the city, until the great civilization the Pale King had built was little more than ruins full of glowing husks, and the few who somehow resisted. The White Lady, understanding at last what her children had been made and unmade for, withdrew into the deep roots of her garden and did a quiet, terrible thing to herself. She sealed away her own body, ended her own ability to ever bear another vessel, wrapped herself in root and stillness as a punishment she chose, unable to forgive herself for the countless children born into the dark and discarded. She sits there still, in the depths of the gardens, a sorrowing goddess grown into her own grief, willing to speak softly to anyone who reaches her, but no longer willing to make anything new. And the Pale King, the maker of it all, the god who built a kingdom and doomed his own children to save it, simply vanished. The story never tells us plainly how he ended. His palace slipped out of the waking world into memory and dream. His body can be found only in those dreaming spaces, still and pale and gone. A god who tried to outthink a god and lost and disappeared into the ruin of his own cleverness, leaving behind only echoes and a kingdom of light-sick sleepers and an abyss full of the small dark children no one had ever come back for. That is where the world sits when our part of the story begins. A dead king, a grieving queen sealed in roots, 3 sleepers holding a failing lock, a hollow child in chains, cracking, leaking the very plague it was made to contain, a fierce lonely daughter guarding the ruins, and, at the bottom of everything, in the sealed dark of the abyss, thousands of small discarded siblings, most of them shells, some of them still drifting as shades, all of them forgotten. Everything the Pale King made to bring an ending has instead become an endless slow dying, a wound that will not close, a seal that is failing one crack at a time. And into that failing world, drawn back by something it cannot name, comes the one small climbing shape we were told to remember. Because one vessel did climb out. Not the chosen one, not the hollow knight, but the other, the sibling left struggling on the last ledge with no hand reaching down. That small vessel hauled itself up out of the abyss on its own, and somehow, before the king sealed the dark away behind him, it slipped out into the wider world. It wandered away from Hallownest entirely, out past the kingdom's edge. A tiny silent thing carrying its own small piece of the void, oblivious to what it was or what it had been made for. It grew in its way out there in the far places, knowing nothing of the pit it came from or the family it left behind. And then, one day, for reasons the story keeps as quiet as the vessel itself, it turned back. Something called to it across all that distance, some pull it could not have explained, and it came home to a kingdom it had never known, a small cloaked figure walking down into the ruins with a nail on its back, and no memory of the dark that made it. The story simply calls this one the Night. It never speaks, it never explains itself, and it is, though it does not know it yet, the last hope of everyone who was ever left behind in the deep. There is something worth resting on in that silence, because it is the truest thing about the night and about all the vessels. The night has no voice, it never speaks a word in all its long journey through the ruins, and this is not shyness or mystery for its own sake. It is what a vessel is. A creature made to be empty does not cry out, does not argue, does not explain, because it was designed to have no self to express. And yet the night acts. It chooses to descend. It presses on through terrible places. It reaches again and again toward the buried heart of a dying kingdom, and no one asks it to, and nothing forces it, and still it goes. That quiet contradiction sits at the centre of everything. Here is a thing that is supposed to be hollow, doing the most willful thing imaginable, walking of its own accord into the dark to try to end a plague it does not remember being made to stop. If it were truly empty, it would not have turned back. The fact that it came home at all is the first soft hint that the night, like the hollow night before it, is not nearly as hollow as it was meant to be. The night carries its own small shadow too, the way all the vessels do. Within it there is a shade, a piece of living void in the shape of itself, and when the night falls, when the small body fails, that shade slips loose and lingers where it died, and the night must return to it to become whole again. It is a strange and gentle mechanic of this world, that the self and the shadow can be separated and rejoined, that the dark inside you can wait patiently at the place of your undoing for you to come back and reclaim it. And it means the night is always quietly in dialogue with its own void, losing it and finding it, dying and returning, never quite able to be rid of the shadow it is made from. The whole journey is, in a sense, the night slowly coming to terms with the darkness inside it, learning first to fear it, then to use it, and at last to belong to it completely. To reach the deepest truth of itself, the night has to go back down into the place it came from, and the way there is guarded and gated and hard, as the way to any birthplace tends to be. Deep beneath the ruins, at the bottom of the ancient basin, there is a sealed door, and the seal on it can only be answered by one who bears a certain mark, the king's brand, a token of the vanished ruler. The knight earns that mark the hard way, through a long confrontation with Hornet, the fierce daughter who guards the ruins, who tests this small silent stranger again and again before yielding the brand that opens the dark. And when the door finally opens and the night descends, it comes at last into the abyss, into the birthplace, into the vast lightless chasm where it and all its siblings were poured into being and left. It is a homecoming with no warmth in it, at first. The abyss does not recognize the night, or rather it recognizes it too well, in the wrong way. The reaching tendrils of void lash out. The drifting shades, the siblings, float toward the small warm thing that has entered their dark, and they do it harm, because they know it is one of them and they want it back, and their wanting is indistinguishable from an attack. The night has to make its way through its own murdered family, through the shells of the discarded and the shades of the never quite dead, up toward the lonely lighthouse on the far shore. And when it climbs that lighthouse and kindles the light, something in the dark eases. The tendrils calm, the reaching sea goes still, a single small light in the deepest dark, and the shadow stops lashing, as if even the void could be soothed by being seen. Past the calmed sea, in a chamber where a dead figure holds up a bowl of pure void, the night lowers itself into the darkness and lets it soak through, and rises wearing it, cloaked now in the very substance of the abyss, able to slip through shadow and through solid things alike. It has begun, without quite knowing it, to stop fleeing the dark inside it, and to start putting it on. But the deepest chamber of the abyss, the true birthplace, does not open to strength or to cloaks. It opens only to a particular sorrow carried in a particular form. Far away in the ruins above, the night can gather the two halves of a broken charm, one fragment from the pale corpse of the vanished king, one fragment from the grieving white lady sealed in her roots, and when the two halves are brought together they form a single thing, a soft glowing token called the king soul, the joined essence of the two beings who made the vessels. It is the closest thing to a parent's blessing that any of these abandoned children will ever receive, the light of a mother and a father held together in one small charm, and only a vessel wearing that joined light, that proof of where it came from, can enter the birthplace and stand in the deepest dark of all. When the night steps into that deepest chamber, wearing the joined light of its parents, the birthplace answers. There is an egg there in the dark, wrapped in tendrils of void, and the story quietly suggests, without ever quite insisting, that this is the place where the void first entered the vessels, where the shadow filled the shells before they had even hatched. And in that chamber, something happens that turns the whole long tragedy of the abyss for one moment into something almost like grace. The shades of the discarded siblings gather, but they do not attack now. They come close, and they surround the small living vessel that has returned to them, and they embrace it. All the abandoned ones, all the cast-aside children who reached for each other in the dark and were punished for it, reach now for the one who came back, and their darkness flows into it and joins with it, and the soft light of the king soul is swallowed and transformed. What the night carries out of that chamber is no longer a parent's blessing. It is a void heart, the joined darkness of all its siblings. The family it was made with gathered at last into one small returning body. That is the deepest turn in the whole story, and it is worth holding still for. The night went down into the abyss carrying the light of the king and queen who made it and discarded it, and it comes back up, carrying instead the dark of the siblings who were abandoned beside it. It has chosen its family, not the makers who threw them away, but the thrown away themselves. And from that moment, the void no longer harms the night. The reaching tendrils fall still wherever it goes. The drifting shades, when it approaches them, no longer attack but simply curl gently and sink back into the ground, as if finally allowed to rest. The dark has recognized its own and made peace, and something in the deep that was reaching and reaching for so long is, at last, quieted. The night is no longer a lone vessel fleeing its shadow. It has become, in some sense, the whole family carried in a single vessel, the gathered dark given one shape and one purpose. And that changes everything about what it can do at the top of the world, in the temple, at the failing seal, before the sibling in chains. For that is where all of this has been leading, back up through the ruins to the Temple of the Black Egg, where the hollow knight still stands, still chained, still cracking, still holding the leaking light inside its ruined body after all these years. To reach it, the knight must first release the three dreamers from their endless sleep, must find Lurien in his tower, and Monomon in her archives, and Harar in the dark of Deepness, and let each of them, at last, stop dreaming. It is a mercy and a violence at once, for their sleep was holding the outer seal, and to wake them is to unlock the door, but their sleep was also an eternity of dreaming service, and there is a quiet kindness in finally letting them rest. One by one the sleepers are freed, one by one the locks fall away, and the door of the Black Egg opens, and the knight walks in to meet the sibling it was left struggling beneath so long ago, the chosen one, the Hollow Knight, the one that did not reach back. What waits inside is one of the most sorrowful figures in the whole story. The Hollow Knight is bound by 4 great chains, its shell cracked and stained, one arm gone, orange light bleeding from the fractures where the Radiance has been slowly winning for years. To free it enough to face it, the knight must break the chains, and then the 2 vessels stand across from one another in the dark. The discarded sibling and the chosen one, mirror images of a single terrible design, and they fight. And the fight is unbearable in a way few confrontations are, because of what the Hollow Knight does partway through it. As the struggle wears on, the great sealed vessel begins to strike itself. It turns its own nail against its own body, stabbing at itself. And the story lets you understand what you are seeing without a single word. Some small fragment of the Hollow Knight's will, the very flicker of self that doomed it, the piece that was not hollow, is still in there, still fighting, still trying after all these years to hold the light down, to punish the crack, to help the sibling who has come to end its long imprisonment. The chosen one that would not reach back in the abyss is reaching now, in the only way its ruined body can, by turning its strength against itself so that the other might win. Even in its failure, even infected, even hollow, it is trying to do the thing it was made for. It never stopped trying. It only ever lacked the emptiness to succeed. And here the story opens, because there is more than one way this ancient sorrow can end, and the story refuses to tell you which is the true one. It sets the possibilities before you like doors in the dark, and lets you understand that it will not choose for you. This is not indecision on the story's part. It is a kind of respect. Some endings are too large and too sad to be settled, and the fall of Hallownest is one of them, and so the story gives you several endings and lets each of them be real, and holds them all in a gentle open hand. Let me walk you softly through the doors, one at a time, because each of them says something different and true about the vessels and what any of it was for. The first door is the simplest and the saddest, and it is the one most travellers pass through first without meaning to. If the night has not yet gone down into the abyss and claimed the darkness of its siblings, if it faces the hollow night as a lone vessel with only its own small shadow, then the fight can only end one way. The night defeats its chained sibling, and as the hollow night dies, the infection pours out of it and into the only other empty thing in the room, into the night itself. And then the chains rise again and wrap around a new small body, and the night takes the hollow knight's place in the dark of the black egg, sealed away, holding the light inside itself, exactly as its sibling did before it. The temple goes quiet, the kingdom goes still, and nothing in truth has changed. The god of light is not gone, only moved into a fresh container. One hollow child has replaced another. The seal will hold for a while, and then, because this vessel is no more truly empty than the last, it will begin to crack, and the whole long tragedy will simply begin again. It is the cycle continuing. It is the wound reopening in a new place. It is the plan working exactly as poorly as it always did. The second door is a variation on that sorrow, and it turns on the fierce daughter who could never leave her siblings to suffer alone. If the night carries the void heart into the temple, the darkness of all its siblings gathered in its chest, then Hornet comes. She swoops into the fight, and with her needle she fractures the hollow knight's cracked shell and pins it, holding the great sealed vessel down to give the night an opening. But the hollow knight is strong even in ruin, and if the moment is missed, if the opening closes, the sealed vessel breaks free of her grip and strikes her down, and the ending that follows is the same sealing as before with one added grief. The night takes its sibling's place in the black egg, and Hornet, unwilling to let it be sealed alone, is sealed with it. Her shape appears on the door of the temple beside the old marks, another sleeper, another lock, perhaps a new dreamer for a new hollow prisoner. The cycle continues again, But this time the lonely protector who guarded the ruins has followed her siblings into the dark rather than leave them there by themselves. It is a sadder ending and a warmer one at once, because at least this time no one is sealed alone. The third door is the one where the cycle finally breaks, and it requires the knight to have become something more than a vessel. If the knight carries the void heart, and if it has awoken the old dreaming power of the dream nail, then in the moment Hornet pins the hollow knight down. It can do something no one before ever could. Instead of killing its sibling, it can reach past the ruined body entirely, into the dream, into the prison of the mind where the Radiance has been held all these years, and face her there directly. And so the small silent vessel enters the dreaming light and stands before the forgotten god at last, the plague at its source, the brilliance that unmade a kingdom, and it fights her not as a husk or a symptom, but face to face in the realm that was always hers. It is a hard and blazing battle, but the knight does not fight it alone. At the end, as the light seems overwhelming, the shade of the hollow knight appears, the freed dark of the chosen sibling rising up beside the discarded one, and together the two vessels do what neither could do apart. The hollow knight's shade tears open the god's defences, and the knight strikes the final blows, and the Radiance is dragged down out of her own light into the void, into the deep old dark that was always her ancient enemy, and there she is swallowed. The infection dissolves. The black egg vanishes from the temple as though it had never been, and Hornet wakes on the empty floor to find only the knight's small shell, broken cleanly in half, the void inside it gone home to the deep with all the rest. The siblings, everywhere, sink at last into the ground and are still. The bugs of the kingdom will dream no more. It cost the knight its small life, and it freed everyone, the living and the dead and the never quite alive, all at once. It is the ending where the reaching finally stops, because there is nothing left to reach for. Everyone is finally at rest. And there is a fourth door, deeper and stranger than the others, the one that goes furthest into what the void truly is. Beyond the ordinary confrontation, there is a place of endless trial called Godhome, a dreaming realm where the mightiest beings of the world can be faced again and again, ascending a great ladder of combat towards something at the very top. If the knight, carrying the void heart, climbs that whole vast ladder to its peak, it meets there the hollow knight restored to its unbroken prime, the pure vessel, the chosen one as it was before the infection ever cracked it, whole and silent and terribly strong, a being the keepers of that realm call by the name of a void god. And past even that, at the very summit, waits the Radiance in her most absolute form, blazing beyond anything the waking world ever saw. And when the night faces her there, and the light grows unbearable, the small vessel stops holding back the dark it carries. It lets the void rise. It becomes, in that moment, the gathered shadow of every sibling that ever was. A towering unified thing the story calls the Lord of Shades, the whole void given one will and one shape at last, and it tears the god of light apart until she bursts into nothing more than a scattered memory. This is the ending called Embracing the Void, and it is the one in which the dark does not merely defeat the light, but consumes it utterly. The oldest force in the world rising up united to swallow its ancient enemy whole. That last ending carries a quiet unease in its tale, and the story lets it linger rather than resolving it. When the void rises united as the Lord of Shades, the darkness does not simply do its work and vanish. Somewhere far off, a body that had been touched by the void begins to leak it. Black tendrils bursting out, the shadow spreading beyond the single small vessel that first gathered it. The forgotten god of light is gone. Yes, consumed, ended. But the deep old dark that consumed her is now awake and unified in a way it has not been since the beginning. And the story leaves you to wonder, gently, whether trading a plague of light for a rising tide of shadow is truly a victory, or only another turn of the same ancient wheel. Light emptied the kingdom by filling every mind. Perhaps the dark could empty it too, in the opposite way, by drawing every shadow home. The story does not say. It only shows you the tendril spreading and lets the unease sit alongside the triumph. Because the oldest forces in the world do not resolve into simple happy endings, and this story was always too honest to pretend they might. You may have noticed that the story never once tells you which of these endings truly happened. That is not an accident, and it is not the story hiding something it knows. The makers of this tale chose deliberately to leave the ending open, to give you several true resolutions and refuse to crown one of them, and there is a deep gentleness in that choice. It means you are not made to accept a single fate for these small hollow children. It means the door where everyone rests, and the door where the cycle continues, and the door where the dark rises all remain, held together, none of them erased by the others. Some travellers hold the ending where the Radiance is dragged into the void as the truest, because it is the one where the reaching finally stops and the siblings are finally still. Others hold the rising of the Lord of Shades as the real conclusion, because it goes deepest into what the void always was. The story does not settle it. It hands you the possibilities and lets you carry whichever one lets you sleep. Tonight, you may carry whichever one you like. There is no wrong door. But underneath all the endings, running through every one of them, there is a single quiet question the story keeps asking, and it is the question that makes the vessels matter. The question is whether any of them were ever truly hollow at all. The whole terrible plan rested on the idea that a vessel could be made empty, a creature with nothing inside it, no mind, no will, no self. And the whole tragedy comes from the fact that this was never quite true. The Hollow Knight was not hollow. It loved its father, and that love was the crack the light came through. The discarded siblings were not hollow. They reached for one another in the dark and were punished for the reaching. And the knight, the small silent one who came home, the one that was supposed to be the emptiest of all, having been thrown away as a failure, turns out to be the least hollow of any of them. It chose to return. It chose to descend. It chose its abandoned family over the makers who discarded it. It chose at the very end to give up its small life so that everyone could rest. A truly empty thing chooses nothing. The knight chose everything, and so the deepest truth of the vessels may be the exact opposite of what they were made to be. They were designed as proof that a living thing could be emptied of itself, and instead they became proof that it cannot. That even in the deepest dark, made for nothing, told they were nothing, these small creatures kept quietly filling with will and care and love, kept becoming someone. No matter how hard the world tried to keep them no one. There is a terrible tenderness in that, and it is worth sitting with in the quiet. The Pale King failed not because his plan was flawed in its logic, but because he could not make a child empty. He tried. He made thousands of them, and threw away every one that showed a flicker of self, and still the flicker kept appearing, because that is what happens when you make a living thing, even out of shadow, even for a purpose, even meaning to keep it hollow. It fills, it becomes. The very success of the vessels as beings was their failure as tools, and the whole plan drowned in that contradiction. You cannot make a person, and also make them no one. The Pale King learned this too late, and paid for it with his kingdom and his children, and himself, and the lesson sits under the whole story like the void sits under the world. Quiet and vast and impossible to look away from once you have seen it. These were never empty things. They were only ever told they were. It is worth turning, for a while toward the three sleepers who held the outer seal, because their part in this is its own small triple sorrow. 3 lives given over to an endless dream so that a hollow child could hold a god. Lurien the Watcher was the one who loved the kingdom from above, gazing down over the great city from the height of his tower. Devoted to the Pale King and to the beauty of what had been built, keeping his lonely watch over the lamps and the rain. He gave his waking life to the seal out of love for his ruler and his city. And he sleeps in his tower still, dreaming, his devotion turned into a lock. Monoman, the teacher, was a keeper of knowledge, a scholar who had spent her life gathering and guarding understanding, and she understood, perhaps better than any of them, exactly what she was agreeing to when she lay down to dream, exactly what the vessels were and what the sealing would cost. She sealed herself anyway, knowledge and all, trusting a plan she may have doubted, and left a faithful student to guard her sleeping form. And hurrah the beast, queen of the tangled dark of deepness, fierce and proud and unlike the others, gave her sleep not out of devotion to the king, but as part of a bargain that got her the one thing she wanted, a child of her own, before she closed her eyes forever. To wake them is one of the strange, quiet mercies of the whole story, and the night must do it 3 times, must travel to each sleeper and, with the old dreaming power, end their long dream and let them stop. Each waking unlocks a portion of the seal, yes, and hastens the confrontation to come, but each waking is also a release, a permission finally granted to 3 beings who lay down their lives and never got to set them down. There is something almost unbearably gentle in it, this small silent creature moving through the ruins to tell 3 eternal sleepers, one by one, that they may rest now, truly rest, that the watch is over and the dream can end. They gave their waking so the kingdom might not fall, and the kingdom fell anyway, and the least the story can offer them is an ending to the dreaming. The night gives them that. It is not a kind journey, the night's journey, but it is threaded all the way through with these small permissions to stop, and that may be the truest thing it does. And through all of it moves Hornet, who deserves her own quiet place in this telling, because she is the one figure in the whole story who is neither a vessel, nor a god, nor a husk, but simply a person who chooses. She is half of the Pale King's design and half of the Beast Queen's dark. and she belongs fully to neither. And out of that in-between place, she does something none of the higher beings managed. She loves without a plan. She guards the ruins of a kingdom that is already lost, not because it can be saved, but because it was hers, and her people's, and the memory deserves a keeper. She tests the small silent stranger who comes wandering down into the dark, and having tested it, she helps it, again and again, appearing at the hardest thresholds, needle in hand, to fracture a chain or turn a fight, or simply to speak a few words to a creature that cannot speak back. She calls the Hollow Knight her sibling, and she calls the Knight her sibling too, claiming these hollow children as kin through their shared father, refusing to let them be only tools or only shadows. In a story full of beings who made or discarded or sealed the vessels, Hornet is the one who simply stands beside them. And when the last dark comes, in more than one ending, she would rather be sealed with her siblings than leave them alone. The story is not finished with her, either. She walks on past the edge of this, telling into a story of her own, into the long silence after the kingdom's fall, still moving, still choosing, still carrying her thread through the dark. But that is another night's tale. Tonight she stands at the threshold of the Black Egg, keeping watch over her hollow family, and that is enough. Let us go back down, though, one more time to the void itself, because the deep old dark is the true centre of everything, and it has one more quiet secret to give up. All through the story, the void seems like many things: a sea, a substance, a scattering of shades, thousands of separate small shadows drifting in a lightless pit. But there are hints, soft ones, that the void is really one thing pretending to be many. A single darkness divided into countless small vessels and shades and tendrils, longing, without a mind to know it is longing, to be whole again. When the night lowers itself into the bowl of void and rises cloaked in shadow, when the siblings sink quietly into the ground at its approach, when the whole gathered dark rises at the very end as one towering unified thing, what you are watching is the void coming back together, the scattered shadow returning to itself. The Pale King broke the darkness into thousands of little pieces, and poured each piece into a shell, and threw most of the shells away, and ever since, quietly, the pieces have been trying to find their way back to one another. That is what the reaching was, all along. Not attack, not hunger, just a divided darkness reaching for the rest of itself, the way a scattered thing reaches to be gathered, the way anything separated too long aches to be whole. That casts the whole sad story of the vessels in a softer and stranger light. They were made by dividing something that had always been one. Each vessel was a small lonely piece of a vast old wholeness, sealed off in a shell, told it was empty, told it was nothing, set against a god of light. And their deepest journey, under all the fighting and the sealing and the tragedy, was simply the long, slow gathering of the dark back into itself. When the night claims the void heart, it is not gaining a weapon so much as coming home to its own kind, letting the divided pieces of shadow recognize each other and rejoin. When the shades stop reaching and sink into rest, it is because the reaching is finally over, because the wholeness they were reaching for has come. Even the most frightening ending, the rising Lord of Shades, is at heart just the darkness made one again, after an age of being broken apart. The void was never the enemy of the story. It was the family. It was the scattered thing longing to be gathered. And the vessels, all of them, the chosen and the discarded and the small one who came home, were only ever pieces of one old darkness trying, across a whole doomed kingdom, to find their way back together and rest. How the night escaped the abyss is one of the questions the story leaves open, and then steps quietly past. The lore does not tell us plainly how it climbed out of a sealed pit that was designed specifically to hold what it was. Even the makers of the story, when asked, said they were not entirely certain. And there is something honest in that admission, because the escaping is perhaps less important than the fact of it. A small discarded child found a way out of the dark. The how matters less than the will it implies, and the will, by definition, was never supposed to be there. The knight that wandered out of the abyss into the world was not supposed to have a will. And yet it walked. It found the cliffs above the darkness, and it moved through the upper world, and eventually it left Hallownest entirely, travelled far enough that the call of the Radiance was only a distant ache and not a fire. Team Cherry confirmed in an AMA that the night left on its own, not for a clear purpose, simply drifting, the way something that has never been told it has a reason might drift. Following the faint pull of existing in a direction that was not straight down. And for a time it was simply out there, in the world beyond the kingdom, small and dark and silent, the only surviving piece of a doomed plan, waiting without knowing it was waiting for the moment it would have to go back. That moment came when the seal began to fail in earnest, when the Radiance's reaching finally grew loud enough to find even the ones who had wandered farthest. The story's dreamers and ghosts and buried lore tablets speak of a call from beyond the seals, something that drew wanderers back to the broken kingdom, that pulled the small forgotten vessel back through the cliffs of Howling and down into the ruins. It came back not because it was summoned by anyone with authority, not because a plan called for it, but because something inside it, something that should not have been there at all, would not let it stay away when the dark was calling. Call it will. Call it loyalty to something it did not consciously know it had. Call it the last echo of a family that had never spoken a word to one another, but had still, in the dark at the bottom of the world, been one thing together. It came back. That, in the end, is the whole of the night's beginning. Not all of the escaped ones went as far or fared as gently as the night, and the story gives us at least one other to grieve, a sibling who got out and was not so lucky. In the depths near the ancient basin there is a broken thing the story calls a fallen vessel, another of the discarded who somehow climbed free of the abyss, only to be caught by the very plague all of them were made to stop. This one did not wander safely away into the far places. It stayed within reach of the infection, and the light found it, and filled it, and broke it, and by the time the night comes upon it, it is a ruined husk lit orange from within, its hollow body turned into just another vessel for the disease. And in the dreaming, its true self can still be found, a sibling shade the story names the lost kin, fighting on in the dream long after its body was lost, a small dark self that got so close to freedom and was swallowed anyway. It is a hard thing to meet, this broken sibling, because it is what the night might have been, what any of them might have been. The escape that did not end in safety, the climb out of the pit that led only into a different dark. The night can lay it to rest, In the end, both the broken body and the dreaming self. And there is mercy in that too. Another sibling finally allowed to stop. But it lingers. The sorrow of it. Not every discarded child that reached the surface found peace there. Some only found a new way to be lost. There are others too, scattered thin across the ruined world, small dead shells of vessels tucked into forgotten corners far from the abyss. Proof that more than a few found their way out over the years and simply died alone in the wide dark, unremembered. Their small bodies going still in places no one would ever come. The night itself begins its journey among such quiet remains out past the kingdom's edge, and the story never makes a great announcement of them. They are just there, small and hollow and gone if you look. Every one of them was a child of the same pit, a piece of the same divided dark, a sibling that got out and found no family waiting and simply stopped. The night is the one who came back, but it was never the only one who left. It was only the one who returned, and that returning, that single choice to come home to the dark rather than die scattered in the light, is the thin bright thread the whole story hangs from. There is one more detail of the abyss worth holding, because it is among the most quietly devastating things the story ever offers, and it lives at that western altar ringed with carved, screaming faces. A vessel by design was meant to have no voice, no way to cry out its suffering, no sound for its pain. That was part of the ideal, part of the terrible emptiness the plan required. A creature that could hold a god's fury and never once cry out. And yet there, in the deepest dark of their birthplace, at an altar surrounded by open silent mouths, the night can gather a power that is nothing but a scream, a shriek of pure void, the gathered anguish of the voiceless given, at last a sound. It is called the cry of the abyss, and when the night looses it, all the silence the vessels were forced to keep comes roaring out at once, every suffering never spoken, every pain never cried, the whole held breath of thousands of children who were made unable to weep. There is something almost unbearable in that image, the voiceless ones finding a voice at the bottom of the pit that unmade them, the scream that was never allowed, finally allowed, and it is fitting that it comes from the birthplace, from the very dark that denied them any sound. The vessels were built to suffer silently. In the deep, the silence finally breaks. It is worth turning to, one last time, toward the god at the centre of the plague, because the Radiance is not simply a villain, and the story does not let her be one. She was, remember, a being who lived in being remembered, and her whole terrible return came out of the oldest and most human of pains, the pain of being forgotten. She had been worshipped once, adored, held in every mind, and then, slowly, without malice, she was let go, replaced by a newer god, dimmed to a rumour and then to nothing, pushed out of the minds that had once been full of her. And she could not bear it. Her cruelty, the plague, the forced remembering, the light poured into unwilling dreams, all of it grew from that unbearable fading, from a god's refusal to be forgotten, from the terror of being erased from the memory of the world. It does not excuse what she became, but it rhymes, quietly, with the fate of the vessels, because they too were forgotten, thrown into the dark and left out of memory, and the whole story becomes, in this light, a sorrowful mirror, a forgotten god of light, and a pit of forgotten children of dark, each unremembered, each reaching in their own way to be gathered back into something. The light reached by forcing itself into every mind, the dark reached by drawing every shadow home. Two kinds of the forgotten, two kinds of reaching, meeting at last in a small silent vessel that carried the dark and faced the light and ended, one way or another, the long ache of them both. There is a quiet thread that runs from the Radiance down through all of this, and it belongs to her people, the moths, who once were her worshippers and are almost entirely gone. When the Radiance faded from the minds of Hallownest, her tribe faded with her, most of them abandoning her memory, some of them, it is gently implied, choosing to forget on purpose, unable to bear the weight of a god the whole world had left behind. But the moths were the keepers of dreams, and before they dwindled they left the world a gift and a tool. From the stuff of dreaming, from the light and the essence of the sleeping mind, they forged a nail that could cut into dreams themselves, a blade that opens the country behind closed eyes. That dreaming nail is the very thing the night carries down through the ruins, the thing it uses to wake the dreamers and to reach the Radiance in her prison and to speak with the dead. There is a deep irony folded into that, soft and sad, because the power the night uses to face the god of light was born from the god of light's own people, made of the very dreaming she ruled. The moth's last gift becomes the instrument of their god's ending. The light forged the blade that finally sends the light into the dark. And there is one moth left, or nearly one, and meeting her is among the gentlest sorrows in the whole story. In a quiet grey place called the Resting Grounds, where the dead of Hallownest were once laid down, and where dreams gather thick, there dwells the last of the seers, an ancient moth grown frail, the final keeper of the old memory of the Radiance. She is the only one who still truly remembers, who still holds the light her people let go, and she is tired, so tired, worn down by carrying a memory the whole world abandoned. When the night comes to her carrying the gathered essence of dreams, she takes it gratefully, and slowly, gift by gift, she nears the end of her long waiting. And when at last the night has brought her enough, she is finally able to do the thing she has longed for, to pass on, to ascend out of her long weariness and be gone, the last rememberer finally allowed to set the memory down. It is another small permission to rest, quietly given, in a story full of them. The last moth, holding the last of a forgotten god, finally allowed to stop remembering, finally allowed to sleep. She does not fear the ending. She has been waiting for it. And the night, the small dark child of the god's ancient enemy, is the one who gives it to her, tenderly, without a word. And beyond the fall of the kingdom entirely, in a dreaming realm apart, the story offers one last strange frame for all of this, a place where beings are worshipped as gods and faced in endless ascending trial. There is a seeker of gods there, drawn to Hallownest by the echoes of its mighty dead, who builds a great ladder of combat, a pantheon, and seeks to attune the whole world to the divine. And in that dreaming pantheon, the vessels take their place among the gods. The hollow night restored to its unbroken prime is faced there as the pure vessel, and the seeker of gods names it a god of the void, a being of endless power, the ruler of a whole tier of the divine. There is a bitter grace in that the hollow child made to be nothing, made to be a tool, made to be empty, is remembered in the end as a god, worshipped in a dreaming pantheon, its silent, unbroken form set among the mightiest beings the world ever held. The one designed to have no self is enthroned as a deity of the deep. It is the last and strangest turn of the same truth the whole story keeps circling. You cannot make a living thing nothing. Try hard enough to empty it, and it does not become empty. It becomes, instead, something vast, something that endures, something that outlasts the very kingdom that discarded it, remembered at last, against all the design in the world as a god. Turn now, softly, toward the maker of it all, because the pale king is easy to hate and harder to understand, and the story asks for the harder thing. He can only be found, by the time the night arrives, in memory. His waking self is gone, vanished into whatever end a god comes to, and what remains of him lives in three dreaming places. There is the white palace, his gleaming home slipped out of the world into a fragile dream, beautiful and precise and empty, a monument to a mind that ordered everything and could not order the one thing that mattered. There is a hidden path of terrible difficulty, a long trial of pain woven into the edges of that dream, at the end of which waits the tenderest and most damning image in the whole story, the king holding the young vessel close, gentle, fatherly, in a quiet moment no one was meant to see. And there is the birthplace itself, at the bottom of the abyss, where his memory presides over the choosing and the discarding. The same king who cradled one child standing over the pit where thousands of others were thrown away. Those three memories are the whole of him, and held together they refuse to resolve into either a monster or a father. He was both. He loved the child he chose, and discarded the children he did not. He built a kingdom of minds and then tried to make children with none. He was brilliant and desperate and proud and grieving, and he doomed everyone, including himself, and he did it in his own mind to save them. There is a particular kind of tragedy in a maker who cannot make the thing he needs, and the Pale King is that tragedy in its purest form. He needed emptiness and could only make fullness. He needed a tool and could only make children. Every vessel that reached back for a sibling, every flicker of care he was forced to judge as failure, was really the sight of his own creation succeeding at being alive while failing at being useful, and he threw each one away, and each one must have cost him something, even if he never let it show. By the end he had spent his kingdom, his queen's peace, his own existence, and a brood of children beyond counting, all on a plan that could never have worked, because it asked a living thing to be nothing. The void under his kingdom offered him a way to fight a god, and he took it, and it unmade him, and the last of him drifts now in a dead palace in a dream, a pale still shape at the bottom of his own cleverness. Hate him if you like, the story will not stop you. But it will also quietly show you the king cradling the child, and let that image sit beside the pit, and ask you to hold both. His queen carries the grief he could not. The White Lady, sealed in her roots in the deep of the gardens, is the one who says aloud what the whole plan meant, and she says it with a sorrow so complete she has punished herself with it forever. She names the irony directly, that the very children born to contain the plague became the way the plague spread, that her spawn was used to grow the thing they were made to stop. She cannot forgive it. She sealed her own body, ended her own power to ever make another child, wrapped herself in stillness and root as a sentence she passed on herself, and she waits there in the dark of the gardens, willing to speak gently to the small vessel that finds her, willing even to give up half of that parent's blessing so the child might claim its family, but never willing to unmake her own punishment. She is a mother drowning in the knowledge of what was done to her children, and the story lets her drown slowly and with dignity, and gives her no relief, because some griefs do not get relief, they only get born. When the night stands before her, one of the thousands she bore and lost, she does not weep or beg forgiveness. She simply helps quietly and lets the child go on toward whatever ending waits. It may be the only apology she has left to give. There is a detail about the Pale King's making that sharpens the whole tragedy to a fine point, and it sits in the pale constructs that still guard his empty places. The king could build mindless things. He did, often, scattered through the white palace, and standing watch even in the temple of the sealed vessel are his constructs, made things of pale metal and light, silent guardians with no thought and no will. Truly empty, truly hollow, exactly the kind of mindless servant the plan seemed to call for. He could shape 1,000 of those without a flicker of a soul in any of them, and that is precisely the point, the terrible hinge of the whole design. Those truly empty constructs were useless for the one task that mattered. A thing with genuinely nothing inside it, a mere mechanism of metal and light, could not hold a god, because to contain the Radiance a vessel had to be more than a machine. It had to be almost alive. It had to be grown, born, filled with the deep old void that is itself a kind of living dark, strong enough and real enough to cage a blazing god within itself. The king needed something that was nearly a person, and yet not quite one, something alive enough to hold the light, and empty enough not to be filled by it. And that razor-thin impossibility is the whole reason the plan was doomed. The very quality that made a vessel able to contain the Radiance, its nearness to life, its almost a soul, was the same quality that let a thought take root and the light leak through. He could make empty machines that were useless, or he could make near-living children that would inevitably fill with a self. He could not make the thing in between, because the thing in between does not exist. A vessel strong enough to hold a god was always going to be alive enough to become one. And so the constructs stand there still, in the pale dead palace and the quiet temple, the king's truly hollow servants, keeping their mindless watch over the places where his not-so-hollow children were raised and chained. There is a bleak poetry in that, the genuinely empty things standing guard over the memory of the ones who were never empty enough. The machines endure, patient and soulless, exactly as designed. The children failed, exactly because they could not help being more than the machines. The king got his perfect emptiness, after all, in the constructs. It simply could not do the one thing he needed emptiness for. Everything he actually required demanded a spark of the very life he was trying to leave out, and the spark, once in, could never be fully kept from becoming a flame. And around all these grand grieving figures, the ruined kingdom itself lies quiet and light-sick, and it is worth walking through it gently, because the fall of Hallownest is a soft, slow apocalypse rather than a loud one. The great city still stands, rain falling endlessly through its dark towers, its lamps still glowing over empty streets. The bugs who lived there are husks now, most of them, shambling dimly through the places they once thought and worked and loved, lit from within by the orange glow of a god they were forced to remember, their minds gone out, their selves replaced by a faint compulsion. A few resisted. Here and there through the ruins there are creatures who held on to themselves, who fought the dreaming sickness and kept their minds, and they are scattered and lonely, and often a little mad with the effort of remaining. But they are still there, still themselves, small lights of stubborn selfhood in a kingdom of the emptied. The story does not rush you through this fallen world. It lets you feel how quiet it is, how much was lost, how a whole civilization of thought and beauty dimmed one mind at a time into a soft glowing silence. It is a melancholy place, Hallownest, gentle in its ruin, and there is a strange peace in wandering it even as you grieve it, the peace of a place that has already lost everything and has nothing left to fear. Beneath the whole world, if you listen for it, there is a quiet architecture of three forces, and the vessels sit at the meeting point of all three. There is soul, the pale life essence that the Pale King's kingdom learned to gather and use, a bright, fragile energy drawn from living things, the power of the mind and the body and the waking world. There is the light of the Radiance, the older brilliance of dreams and worship and memory, a fire that fills and commands, and there is the void, the oldest of all, the deep dark that empties and gathers and waits. The vessels are made of that last one, the shadow, and they are set against the second one, the light, inside a kingdom built on the first one, the soul. When the night draws soul to heal itself or to cast, when it faces the light of the Radiance, when it gathers the dark of its siblings, it is moving between all three of these old energies at once, a small creature standing exactly where the three great forces of the world overlap. There is something fitting in that. The vessels were always meant to be the place where light was trapped by dark, the hollow point where the brightness of a god would be swallowed by the oldest shadow. They are the meeting place made flesh, or made shadow, the living seam between the forces that made and unmade their world. The story is careful too to leave certain places closed, and part of its particular quiet comes from how much it chooses not to show. The abyss the night explores is only the shore of the void, the edge of the deep. Below it, beneath the sea of shadow, there is more, a whole twisted depth the story gestures toward and never opens, places the makers of the tale imagined and then set aside, leaving them as a darkness beneath the darkness, hinted at and never entered. And there are older mysteries still, the vanished civilization that worshipped the void before anyone, whose fate is never explained, whose relics lie scattered and silent in the deep. The story could have answered these things and chose not to, and that choosing is a gift rather than a withholding. It means the world stays larger than the telling. It means there are still deep places no light has reached, still questions the dark keeps to itself. And there is a strange comfort in that, in a world humble enough to admit it has not shown you everything, in a darkness deep enough to still hold secrets. You do not have to know the bottom of the abyss to rest above it. Some depths are meant to stay unlit. What the story does show you, over and over, in every corner of its sad, quiet world, is a single feeling, and it is the feeling that makes the vessels matter to anyone who has ever felt small or overlooked or set aside. It is the feeling of being unseen and the long ache of wanting finally to be gathered in. The discarded siblings in the abyss were unseen, thrown into the dark and forgotten, reaching for one another because no one else would reach for them. The hollow night was seen only as a tool, valued for its emptiness, loved almost by accident, and then chained in the dark for the crime of not being empty enough. The husks of the fallen kingdom lost even themselves, unseen from the inside out, and the night, the small silent one, was the most discarded of all, a failure cast aside at the very last ledge. And it is that one, precisely that one, the thrown away child, who comes home and gathers the whole lost family back together and gives them rest. There is a deep and gentle promise buried in that, if you want to take it with you into sleep. The overlooked one matters. The discarded one comes back. The small thing told it was nothing turns out to be the one that saves everyone, not by becoming powerful, though it does, but by refusing to leave its family in the dark. The reaching that got them all thrown away was never the flaw. It was the whole point. It was the only thing that ever mattered. So let the story begin to settle now, the way the void settles when the reaching is finally over. Let the great grieving figures rest. The pale king in his pale dead palace, still at last, his terrible cleverness spent. The white lady in her roots, her long sentence quiet in the dark of the gardens. The three dreamers released from their endless dream, allowed at last to simply stop, hornet at her threshold, needle lowered, keeping her patient watch. And the vessels, all of them, the chosen and the discarded, and the one who came home, gathered together in the deep, the divided darkness made whole, the reaching stilled, the family no longer scattered. Whatever ending you carry, whichever door you chose, let it be one where they are together, because that was all any of them ever wanted, under all the plans and the plague and the falling kingdom. They only wanted to not be alone in the dark, and in the end, in the deepest true ending under all the others, they are not. There is a small recurring mercy woven all through the night's long dark journey, and it is a good one to rest on as the night deepens. Scattered across the ruined kingdom, in quiet corners and hidden alcoves, there are places to sit. Simple worn benches tucked into the dark, where the small silent vessel can stop and set itself down and be still for a moment before going on. Every time the night rests on one of these, the world steadies around it, its strength returns, and for a breath or two the endless pressing forward simply pauses. In a story so full of striving and sealing and falling, these little resting places are where the night is most itself, most at peace, a small creature sitting quietly in the dark of a dead kingdom, gathering itself unhurried, safe. There is no fight on the bench. There is nothing to reach for. There is only the sitting, and the quiet, and the gentle certainty that the going on can wait a little longer. If you want an image to hold as you drift tonight, hold that one. a small tired traveller, resting on a warm bench in a quiet dark place, with nowhere it needs to be and nothing it needs to do. Letting the stillness hold it for a while, you are on that bench now. You may rest as long as you like. It is worth noticing too that this whole story takes place as much in dreams as in the waking dark. The Radiance lives in the dream realm, reaching into sleepers. The three dreamers hold their seal from within an endless dream. The old power the night carries is a dreaming power, a nail that opens minds and memories, that lets it step sideways out of the waking world into the soft, strange country of sleep, where gods can be faced, and the dead can be spoken to, and the past replays itself in gentle loops. So much of what matters in Hallownest happens in that country, behind closed eyes, in the place we all go when the waking world lets us finally put it down. There is something fitting in falling asleep to this particular story then, because the story itself understands sleep as a real place, a deep and important country, the country where the oldest things live and the heaviest weights are finally carried by someone other than you. As you drift toward that country now, you are going somewhere the story knows well. You are going down into the dreaming, where the light and the dark work out their ancient quarrel far below the surface of you, and where you, small and tired and safe, are allowed simply to rest while they do. It is worth sitting one more moment with the ones we have no names for. Every vessel in the abyss except the Hollow Knight was discarded without a name. There was no ceremony of naming, no soft moment where a parent leaned over a small face and decided what to call it. They were counted and found impure and left. The Hollow Knight was given a title, a function, a set of chains and a sealed room, but even that is not quite a name. Not the kind a child gets from being looked at with love and having a sound assigned to it that means you, specifically, only you, forever. The Hollow Knight was named for what it was supposed to be. The small wandering vessel who returned is called the Knight, which is again a description rather than a name, a word that speaks to what it carries and where it came from, rather than to who it is. None of the vessels were ever given the gift that every living thing deserves, of being called something that belongs only to them. They were numbers in a terrible count, and the ones who failed the count were not even numbers, just shells in the dark. And yet they had selves. They had the will to reach. They had the impulse to gather. They had, in the silence they were forced to keep, something that was theirs and no one else's, something the whole careful plan of emptying them did not and could not take away. They were never named, and they were never nothing. Both of those things were true at once. Let that sit with you softly, the way a small grief can sit without being a wound, as a tender thing in the dark. They were never named, and they mattered, and the story quietly insisted on both. Consider, before the last quiet settles fully, how much of this enormous sorrowful story is told in silence. The vessels do not speak. The Knight never says a word, and neither did the Hollow Knight, and neither did any of the small discarded ones in the dark. There are no speeches at the end, no last declarations, no final tender words exchanged between siblings before the dark takes them home. The whole weight of it, the sealing and the falling and the freeing, is carried wordlessly by creatures who are made unable to speak. And there is a strange grace in that. because it means the story is never about what anyone says. It is only ever about what they do. The night cannot tell you it loves its siblings. It can only descend into the pit and gather them. The hollow night cannot tell you it is still fighting the light. It can only turn its own nail against itself in the dark. The White Lady's deepest sorrow, the Pale King's deepest tenderness, the whole shape of the tragedy, all of it lives in gesture and image rather than in words, in a hand that reaches or does not reach, in a chain, in a cradling, in a small shape climbing a last ledge. The story trusts the silence to carry the meaning, and it does, and there is a lesson in that for anyone lying awake with too many words in their head. The most important things are often the ones done without saying. The reaching matters more than any word about reaching. And a small silent creature, doing the quiet right thing over and over without ever once explaining itself, can carry more love than a whole kingdom of speeches. That silence is in its way the perfect thing to fall asleep inside, because sleep is where the words finally stop. All day the mind talks, explains, argues, lists, worries aloud in its own quiet voice, and sleep is the country where all of that goes still, where the talking finally ends and something older and wordless takes over. The vessels live in that wordless country all the time. They are made of silence, and drifting off to their story, you are drifting toward the same stillness they carry, the place past words, the deep quiet where the reaching and the striving finally hush. Let your own words slow now. Let the lists and the worries and the explanations trail off into quiet, the way the story trails into silence, the way the dark pools soft and speechless at the bottom of the world. You do not have to say anything. You do not have to think anything through. You can let the wordless dark carry the meaning and simply rest. And here, at the last, is the deepest and gentlest thing the story has to give. The thing it was quietly saying under every sad turn of the vessel's fate. The Pale King wanted them hollow. He wanted them empty. But empty is not the same as at rest, and that difference is the whole heart of it. To be hollow, in the way he meant, was a terrible fate, a life with nothing inside it, made for a purpose and denied a self. But to be at rest is something else entirely, something the vessels were never allowed until the very end. They were made empty and then never permitted to be still. They were poured out and thrown down and set reaching in the dark, never held, never gathered, never allowed to stop. The whole long ache of the story is the ache of things that were denied rest, and its deepest ending, under all the others, is the moment they finally receive it. The siblings sinking quietly into the ground, the reaching stopping, the dark gathered and calm. Not emptiness, but peace. Not hollowness, but rest. The vessels were never really asking to be filled. They were only asking to be allowed to be still, together, in the dark, at last. And in the end, they are. That is what you can take with you now, down into your own dark and your own rest. You do not need to be empty to be at peace. You only need to be allowed to stop for a while, to set down the reaching and the striving and the long list of things undone, and be still, gathered, safe in the dark, the way the vessels are still at the end of everything. The kingdom above them has fallen and gone quiet. The plague is spent. The gods are laid to rest in their palaces and their roots and their dreams. And at the very bottom of the world, in the deep old dark that was there before anything, and will be there after everything, the small hollow children who were told they were nothing lie, gathered at last into one quiet wholeness, no longer reaching, no longer alone, finally allowed to rest. So let the world go quiet now, the way it goes quiet at the bottom of the abyss, when the last light is kindled and the reaching stops. There is nothing left to fight tonight. The god of light has been faced, in one dream or another, and the dark has done what the dark does, and the long quarrel of the oldest forces has settled, for now, into stillness. You do not have to hold any of it. You do not have to choose the ending or solve the mystery or carry the grief of the king and the queen. All of that can rest in the dark where it belongs. And so can you. Let the ruined city fall silent above you. The endless rain over the dark towers, softening now, quieting, the lamps glowing gently over empty streets, the whole fallen kingdom breathing slow in its long twilight. Let the husks grow still. Let the few who resisted lay down their stubborn watch and rest at last. Let Hornet lower her needle at the threshold of the temple and close her eyes, her watch over her hollow family kept, her love enough for tonight. Everything that was reaching can stop reaching now. Everything that was holding on can let go. Go down, softly, past the roots and the rock, past the sleeping city, past the deep places where the vanished ones left their silent relics, down into the abyss where the dark lies pooled and patient. But it is not a frightening dark tonight. The tendrils are calm. The sea of shadow is still. The small light burns steady on the far shore, and in its glow the deep is only quiet, only resting, only home. And scattered across the floor and the ledges, the small shells lie peaceful in the dark, and the shades no longer drift and reach, because the reaching is over, because the family is gathered, because the divided darkness has found its way back to itself at last. Picture the small worn bench in the quiet corner of the dark, and the small tired traveller resting on it, and let that traveller be you. Nowhere to go, nothing to reach for, nothing to fight or seal or carry. Only the sitting, and the stillness, and the deep old dark holding you gently, the way it holds all its gathered children, without judgment, without demand, asking nothing of you but that you rest. You were never nothing, you were only tired. You are allowed to stop now. Let the images come slower, the way they do at the edge of sleep, loosening, drifting, no longer needing to mean anything. A single light on a dark shore, a sea of shadow gone calm, a worn bench in a quiet place, small shells at peace in the deep, a fierce sister keeping watch, and then at last resting too, a king cradling a child in a dream no one was meant to see, two small siblings returning to the dark together, no longer alone, the last ledge, and the hand that finally reaches down. Because that is the image to end on, the one the whole story was quietly reaching toward. The small vessel struggling at the last ledge with no one reaching for it, and then, at the end of everything, the reaching arriving after all the abandoned ones reaching for each other at last. The whole lost family gathering in the dark, no one left struggling alone, no one left behind, every small discarded thing finally gathered in. The reaching was never the flaw. The reaching was the whole point, and in the end, the reaching wins. Let your breathing slow now, soft and even, like the calm sea of shadow far below the world. Let the dark gather gently around you, warm and quiet and kind. The kingdom is at rest. The gods are at rest. The dreamers dream no more. The vessels are gathered, and still, no longer hollow, no longer reaching, no longer alone. And you, small and tired and safe, are gathered too, held in the deep quiet dark, where nothing is asked of you and nothing is owed, where you may set down everything and simply be still. The light burns steady on the far shore, the sea of shadow lies calm, the small ones rest in the deep, together at last. There is nothing left to do tonight, there is nowhere you need to be. There is only the dark, and the stillness, and the rest, and the gentle old promise underneath it all, that the reaching ends, that the family gathers, that the small forgotten thing comes home. Rest now. You are gathered in, you are not alone in the dark. Everything can wait until morning. Sleep gently, and rest well, and good night.